Hey there, welcome to another week of how to be great at intuitive eating in midlife. This is week 4, and today we're going to be talking about the principles of how to cope with your emotions with kindness and also movement for feel the difference, I think is how it's said in intuitive eating. So let's get our Instagram folks in here too. And they will be joining us shortly. And so, if we haven't met already, I am Amanda Bullat. I'm a registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and a strong advocate for helping you savor food and body in midlife. And as a former athlete with a disordered eating relationship and a woman in my 40s, I live for helping women undiet their lives through intuitive eating, mindfulness, and wellness without obsession. So, throughout this whole month, we have been talking about the principles of intuitive eating and how they relate to midlife. So, if you've missed the previous 3 episodes of this, How to Be Great at Intuitive Eating, hang on one quick second. I just realized, thank you so much for one of our audience members pointing that out. I didn't have the microphone and the headphones on. So, sometimes your brain just doesn't connect all the dots in midlife. Okay, so let's start that all over again, because I don't think you could hear me before. So if we haven't met before, I am Amanda Bullat, registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and a strong advocate for helping you savor food and body in midlife. And as a former athlete who had a disordered relationship with food and my body, and now a woman in my 40s, I live for helping women in midlife undiet their lives through intuitive eating, mindfulness, and wellness without obsession. So, this whole month, we've been talking about the principles of intuitive eating and how they relate to midlife. If you've missed the previous 3 episodes of this series, then you can find those at the Savor Food and Body podcast. And they're all listed as How to Be Great at Intuitive Eating, weeks 1, 2, 3, and then 4. So, this episode, if you weren't catching it live, this episode will be uploaded on Friday to the podcast. And we also have an office hours. So I've been doing office hours every Friday. If you're welcome to come and just ask questions about intuitive eating or nutrition for midlife, or what does Savor Food and Body even mean, just come and say hi. We are doing that for a couple of more Fridays. So this week and then next week, I believe it's February 3rd. And there was a link below this in office hours. They're totally free. You just need to register so that you can get the Zoom link. And if you're not familiar with intuitive eating, if maybe this is just something you've started exploring this month, the intuitive eating principles were originally created by Evelyn Tribole and Elise Rush, 2 dietitians, and they created them back in the 1990s. So it's been around a while. There are well over 100 scientific papers and studies written and conducted about intuitive eating and its effectiveness of helping people live joyfully with food, movement, and not focusing on the scale all the time. So, throughout this series, I've been walking you through how I typically teach the principles of intuitive eating to my clients. And I've done supervision with Evelyn, and she even said in our supervision, like, there's not necessarily a straight linear path through going through the intuitive eating principles. It is really important to focus on that rejecting the diet mentality. That first principle is really helpful to focus on that first, and it can be helpful to focus more on gentle nutrition later in this process because there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen in between. So, other than that, how you mix up the principles in the middle is kind of up to you and your lived experience. So, that's how I work with my clients as we go through the principles together. We kind of pick and choose and what's fitting them at the time. And there's a lot of overlapping. So as you go back and you listen to some of those previous episodes that I've done, you'll see that I'm combining several of these principles when I teach them for a reason because they overlap and they connect together. So, just as a recap, we've talked about how to reject the diet mentality and make peace with all foods. In the second week, we talked about how to identify food police thoughts and how focusing on satisfaction with food can keep those food policing thoughts at bay. Your brain can't do both things at the same time. So it's really hard to be critical with yourself and also focusing on in the present moment. And last week was all about what I call the hunger fullness spectrum and why it can be hard to honor subtle signs of hunger and how satisfaction plays a critical role in finding comfortable fullness. So that's an area that I spend a lot of time with my clients because there's individual life and food situations that come up that we need to practice through. So this week, we're going to talk about how to create an emotional coping toolbox and why it's important to include food. So, even if you think that emotional eating is the root of your dysfunctional relationship with food, I see this a lot in my practice. And there's a lot of negative messaging out there about like how to fix your emotional eating, like you should stop doing that. But the problem is, we are humans, we are emotional creatures, and we do use food for celebration just as much as we can use food for coping with negative emotions. So it's not really accurate to say stop emotional eating. That's like saying stop being an emotional person. However, there is a time and a place for food helping you with coping with emotions. And if it's the only tool in your toolbox, it's not going to be as effective. And eventually that tool is going to wear out. So we're going to talk about that today. I like to use the analogy of a knife, like you have your block of knives sitting on the counter. And if you continue to use the same knife for everything in your kitchen, the bread, the cheese, opening the box from the UPS or the FedEx, and that knife eventually is just going to get dull. It's not going to cut the bread as well. It's not going to cut the apple as well, or whatever it is that you're working with. So if you have the same tool that you keep using over and over and over again for all these different things, it's just not going to work. So we want to have a different mix. We want to have variety when it comes to our emotional coping toolbox. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're also going to talk about how exercise or movement that promotes body kindness, strength, and empowerment and doesn't focus on before and after pictures can be a critical part to not only your intuitive eating journey throughout midlife, but it can be a critical part of your emotional coping toolbox. So I just want to say hi to Melanie and hi to Food Freedom Body Love. Wonderful to see you guys here on Instagram. Okay, so the intuitive eating principle, cope with your emotions with kindness. That's how it's phrased in the intuitive eating book and workbook. So, this, like I said, feeling emotions is a part of being human, and that doesn't matter whether it's anxiety, depression, joy, fear, boredom, happiness, or anything in between. Emotions make our lives interesting and difficult at the same time, but it's all part of the human experience. And learning to be with your emotions and how they show up in your body, how they physically feel in your body, is an essential skill to intuitive eating. So, at the root of intuitive eating, it's staying connected to our bodies. We've been talking about that in various shapes and forms throughout this whole series. So, meeting your emotions with kindness and compassion, and this is really kind of rooted in the work of Dr. Kristen Neff, who is one of the foremost authorities on self compassion, is also really important. So, self compassion, compassionate curiosity, I use that term a lot, is really at the root of all of this. And that doesn't matter if we're talking about our emotions or we're just talking about trying to feel our hunger and fullness and satisfaction. Compassion needs to be that foundation. So, to build an effective emotion coping toolbox, we need a variety of tools to support the variety of emotions that you feel at any given time. So, emotional coping tools might include a journal, spending time in nature, or gardening, deep belly breathing. I'm a big fan of popping myself on the floor, knees up, and just letting that floor kind of take the weight of whatever I'm feeling or whatever's going on in life, and doing some deep belly breaths with that. Of course, meditation, art, doing, it doesn't have to be real um, constructed like art therapy per se, but if you like coloring or drawing or painting or just being your creative self, that can be helpful. Of course, listening to music or playing music, and then exercise and movement, like I mentioned earlier, and we'll get into that in more detail. Connecting with a pet, whether it's your pet or your neighbor's pet, but just having some playful time connecting with, petting their fur or um, playing ball with them, whatever that might be. Also something warm, cool, smooth, rough to touch. So that could be holding a mug of a warm or cold beverage, and just that sensation of I'm holding something that has a texture or a temperature helps to ground you in the present moment. And focusing on that can keep your brain from spinning off into all of the shoulds and shouldn'ts and what ifs. And then also food. So, like I said, it's important to have food still in that coping toolbox, but we want to add in some of these other tools as well. So, one of the reasons it's important to keep food in the toolbox, if you've used food in the past, is it kind of goes back to that full permission principle that we talked about, I think in episode 3, probably 2 or 3. And because when we have this from a psychology perspective, when we have this idea of like, I can't use food, I can't use food, I can't use food, what do you want to do? What's your main go-to? Of course, it's going to be food. And or you've got this strong emotion that you're trying to manage how to deal with, and then you're also struggling with I shouldn't be using food, so you've got like these two fights going in your head. That's exhausting, and it's not helpful. So by allowing food to still be in that toolbox, we kind of bring that stress level down from the shoulds and the shouldn'ts around food, and open then ourselves up for, and what else might I want to choose? So we're not trying to do two battles at the same time. So you need to know that food can still exist in your toolbox, so that you don't fall into that shame trap of when you do turn to food to cope temporarily. Sometimes food is the easiest tool that we have. If you're in a stressful moment, it's at work or something like that, and you finish a stressful meeting and you go back to your desk and you want to have a snack, that might be the easiest thing for you to do at that time to take care of yourself. It wouldn't be appropriate for you to go, oh, hold up, I can't listen to it, talk to any more people, write emails, I got to meditate for 10 minutes. Like, that's probably not realistic. And, or you can't have your pet at work, or you can't just take off for a hike for the rest of the afternoon for many people. So it's okay to turn to food when you need it, when there's nothing else that you can turn to. But again, can't be the only tool in your toolbox. So, as you've probably experienced in the past, when you feel that shame, it's really easier shame that you're choosing food. It's really easy to trigger continuous emotional eating, and even fall into what one of my clients affectionately called "fuck it eating," um, aka binging too. So, don't set up two battles for yourself. Just stick with these emotions. I'm having a hard time dealing with this strong emotion, and just stick with that, and just know that food is there if you need it, but go through this other list that you might have created for yourself. I do recommend to all of my clients and students to make a list in your journal or on a post-it note, on a mirror, wherever it's easy for you to see, like, what are my go-to coping tools, so that when you're in that heat of the moment, you don't have to try to go like, oh, what should I choose? Like, Amanda said I could choose food, but I shouldn't choose it all the time, and I chose it yesterday. Like, don't do that to yourself. If you have a list, then you have those go-to resources, and you can just pick off whatever feels like it'll be helpful in that time. So one of those things that I mentioned earlier, one of those tools can be movement. So in intuitive eating, they call this principle movement feel the difference. And what that's really meaning is learn how to connect with movement, connect with exercise, not from a place of you're trying to change your body, tone it, shape it, lose the weight, whatever it is, but connect more from, I like moving my body this way. This moving my body in this way keeps me from feeling stiff, helps me feel stronger, has helping me feel more flexible, able to do daily life activities easier, walk up the stairs without getting out of breath, or get up and down off the floor to play with kids or grandkids, whatever that might be. So that's what we mean by feel the difference. Feel the difference of how it is to relate to movement and exercise from this place of I'm connecting with my body through movement versus I'm trying to shape and change my body through movement. And when we do that, then it makes movement a really great tool for emotional coping. However, there's a caveat to this because I fell into this trap during my disordered eating competitive athlete days. Movement can also end up being one of those numb out activities. So, I mean, in my experience, personal experience, I was literally running away from the things I didn't want to feel in my life, the difficulties that I was having in my life. And I was pounding out the miles, whether it was on trails, whether it was on pavement, and I wasn't dealing with, I've got some strong emotions and I don't know what to do with them. I wasn't given those tools to figure out what to do with them. So I just ran my body into the ground, quite literally. So if you're someone who has had kind of a complicated relationship with exercise, with movement, taking a break from movement might be a critical part of your healing journey. And this might not be a tool that is helpful for you to use for emotional coping. You might need to explore some of those other tools to try to understand your emotional being self and uh, how to help yourself through those difficult emotions without turning to the old tool that you've always used. Again, going back to that analogy, if movement was the same knife that you always picked up to cut everything in your kitchen, in your house, then movement's not going to be as effective for you anymore and could actually contribute to the problem. For those of you that the movement was not that, and maybe you want to look at moving your body more in midlife in particular to experience the benefits of weight bearing exercise on bone health, cardiovascular health, or this emotional component, this emotional coping piece, there's a really great study that was mentioned in the book Burnout, which I highly recommend anybody over the age of 40, especially reading the book Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagowski, they're sisters. And they talk about movement, in particular, things like dance or like shaking and wiggling, fast walking, lifting weights, and maybe even running if that's appropriate for you. And how, in moving your body for a short period of time, the study only did it for 20 minutes, can help your body move stress hormones through its system and bring you back down to a calm state. So again, don't get hung up on that 20 minutes. That's just the amount that was shown in this one particular study. But I thought it was a really interesting and validating to show how movement can be helpful for emotional coping, particularly around those difficult emotions with stress and anxiety that we have a lot of going on these days. So when you can separate movement from focusing on weight loss or to maintain weight, from focusing on body measurements, what's the size of my waist, what's the size of my biceps, my butt, my thighs, whatever, and before and after pictures, which are also problematic, then you open up the space to move into using movement and exercise as a way to connect with your body from the inside out. And when you learn to connect with your body from the inside out, you're more able to focus on the hunger piece, the satisfaction piece, the fullness piece. So as you're starting to see throughout this series, all of these principles really kind of tie together. And movement can be that very like practical, tactile way to start connecting you back to your body. Again, from the inside out, not focusing on changing your outward appearance. So it can be a really profound way of relating to movement and exercise. So both of these, creating your emotional coping toolbox, focusing on movement and feeling how different it can be in your body, rather than trying to change your body, both of those tools can really help you create a healthy relationship with your body and with food. Again, if food isn't always having to be the therapist in your emotional coping world, and food can just go back to being food, then you're more likely to be able to tune into what's satisfying about food. What's my hunger? What's my fullness? When you are working on focusing movement and exercise from a place of, I want to feel connected to my body versus changing my body, then that's helping you develop a healthier relationship with your body in general. So that's it for this episode. Again, you can find the replay for this episode on the Savor Food and Body podcast, and that will show up on Friday on the podcast feed on all major podcast players. And we have an office hours coming up on Friday too at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So again, click the link below this video, and then you can come and hang out with office hours. So I'd love to see you. I'd love to answer any questions about these two principles, about principles that we've already talked about, or just how you're doing too in January. We're almost at the end of January, National Dieting Month. I'd love to hear how this month has been for you too. So with that, I will sign off for this week, and I'll look forward to seeing you all next week, same time, same place, if technology is working for us. And we will catch you later. So have a great week, savoring food in your body, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.